Great. Wow, great. Thank you very much. Great to be here again. I wanted to say I've been in America 5 times, and 4 out of those 5 times I've been in North Carolina. Asheville and Hendersonville. So I feel I know this place really well, and it's really nice to be back this time. I was thinking, can we lower the lights a little bit, maybe, just because there's a lot of photographs in the talk rather than text. Great. So thank you very much for coming, and I wanted to say a big thank you to the people who got me here. So originally that was Katie Lee, who organized the exhibition originally, and Simon Olding from the partner organization, and Lauren, and my super helper Carrie, who's been amazing. We've been setting up the show, it's going really well. And of course Batan and Stefan, who've been my hosts here, and it's amazing to be back. It feels like being at home. So, and all of you for coming, so thanks a lot. So I've got a talk with about 120 slides. That's a lot of photographs, but I'll go through them quite quickly. And what I'll talk about is mainly my practice, but also projects that are on show in the exhibition. So I'll start. If you can't hear me, just let me know, or if I'm talking too quickly. Sometimes when I get nervous, I talk a little bit too quickly, but you'll just tell me to slow down. Okay, so I grew up in Athens, in Greece, and I come from a scientific family. I didn't study science myself. I did a bit of math. I was really interested in math and things like that at school, but my whole family is quite scientific, so I never really thought I was going to be a weaver. It was never on the cards, and you don't really see professional weavers in Greece. You see old ladies wearing black clothes in the mountains or on the islands weaving away, and you kind of don't think that that's going to be your professional career necessarily growing up. So I wanted to be a vet when I was growing up, and I went to work for a vet when I was about 16, and realized I really can't do this because we had to put down all these animals, and then we had some crazy people coming in who thought that their animals could feel what they were feeling before they actually felt it, which I'm sure somehow happens, but anyway, it felt like it was a world I couldn't quite understand, didn't belong to. So then I discovered photography, and that's what got me into art and design. And also I was really supported by my family, because they were really interested in crafts, and they had a lot of respect for people who use their hands to do things. So the first kind of approach to art and design was through the work of Henri Cartier-Bresson, who's a French photographer. He lived in the last century. Now I think he died when he was 96 years old or something like that, and he would photograph up to the end of his life. And what I really loved about his photographs was the way that he could balance the world around him in this perfect image and show you what he saw, and you could marvel on simplicity of life. It wasn't an extravagant thing he was photographing, it was just life passing him by. And what I really liked about his work as well was the fact that he had a lot of integrity, so he wouldn't try and change the image to show it to you. He would just show you exactly what he saw. So there were really good values there, and I was very interested in his work, and I picked up a camera and just started taking lots of photographs as well. That way. There you go. So there's another one. So he would just catch people moving. He was a photo reporter, and he was using a very small Leica camera, which he called his, well, it was his tool in a way, it was his sketchbook. So he would just travel the world and photograph what he saw in front of him. So I started working with photography in Greece, and just studying a bit of photography on the side with school. And then I had the opportunity to come to England and study, and I did a foundation in art and design, which is a year-long course that you do before you start a BA or a Bachelor in Arts. So before you start and embark on the arts, it's a chance to try lots of different things and see what you like. And that's when I came across textiles, and I felt like the whole world opened up, because photography was one thing, and I still take a lot of photographs and love it, but textiles was something that I thought was absolutely magical. All these threads and colours that come together, and the fact that you can end up making something that you can touch, for me was incredible. So I was really hooked. And I went on to study weaving, textile design and weaving at Central St Martin's, one of the bigger colleges in London. So what I was really interested in with weaving was the structural elements. So I found it fascinating that you could still be a bit of a nerd and have a pencil case and have your, which I really liked, and it kind of went with the scientific background, and I could have my ruler and count threads, and it felt really good when you knew that you've counted all the threads and they match up with your original kind of calculations, and that's what people hate with weaving sometimes as well, so I appreciate that as well. But I love that, it really settled me. But also the fact that you could make something that could become a more three-dimensional shape. So you had all these parameters you were working with, but you could also go beyond them and stretch them, and that was fascinating for me. So at the time I was reading about, I think it was Carlos Castaneda book, and it was about parallel universes and the world in general, and I was trying to figure it out in my head, and I thought if I try and weave this, I might understand it better. So my approach with weaving was a lot of the time to look around me and try and recreate what I was looking at in order to understand it. So these are layers of fabric woven together on the loom, not stitched, they were actually woven, and they would open up within space. So space was quite interesting for me, and I was working in that way more. So these were fabrics woven with nylon threads and wire and silk and cotton, and they would then open up almost like pages in a book. This was the kind of culminating piece of work for that degree. It was 12 layers of fabric which were woven on a 24-shaft loom. So are you all weavers? I can see some knitters, which is in the audience. Anyway, the weavers here will understand that it 24 shafts means that you have 12 possibilities of fabric, really, as long as you do plain weave, which means you only need 2 individual threads. But that meant I had 6 different shuttles. I made a belt with 2 shuttles, and then I was wearing my jeans all the time, so I had 2 shuttles at the front and 2 shuttles at the back. So I was weaving. I'd only weave about 3 inches a day, and I had to choose the right shuttle, otherwise all the fabrics would get kind of sewn up together in the edge anyway. I had no idea why I was doing it, and I think my tutors didn't know either, but it felt important. And what was really important was that there were fiber optics in there as well. I don't know why, but somehow all these these tiny little things are fiber optics. So I managed to weave this thing, and we opened it up and set it up, and it was fantastic because the archive at Central St Martin's decided to buy the piece for their collection. So that was brilliant. At first I was thinking, no, this is my life, this is the world, you know, I can't possibly give this away, but I think you've got to learn to give pieces away if you can, if you're lucky enough to kind of have interest. So I left St Martin's, and I didn't get a job, surprisingly, because not many people wanted that kind of weaving happening. So I worked as an assistant for a company called Salt, and they make window hangings, really. They're almost like blinds, but they're hand woven and made to measure. So it was really important for me to weave everything correctly and really look at the edges of the fabric and make sure everything measures well. So I was lucky because I got a job doing something I really enjoyed. But at the same time I was saying I really want to continue with my own practice and kind of develop these ideas I had about about structure mainly. So I went on to the Royal College of Art, which is a 2-year MA project. It's a university in London, and you can do an MA course, a Master of Arts course, and it takes about 2 years to do that. So it's a good college because it means you've got enough time to develop the work, and also it's very small, so you have a really good opportunity to be close to your tutors, and also everyone else studying at the same college can only do an MA or a PhD level. So it's you meet really interesting people basically, and it's a great place to be. So to my horror, my tutor said I'm not allowed to do any layers or work with anything that I really wanted to work with. So it was a challenge. It was a difficult 2 years, but at the same time I learned a lot. And what I started doing there was working with my photographs more directly. So we had projects with industry in the first year, and then the second year we could develop our own practice. And this is a project with Masters of Linen, who are developing linen for different markets. And what they wanted was to create a linen fabric for winter. So I was thinking about the feeling of walking on sand, and I would go back to Greece in the summer, and if you haven't been to Greece, it's a good chance to go. It's a beautiful place, and beautiful beaches, and really nice people. So do go if you can. Support Greece if you can. So I would walk on the sand, and that feeling of walking on warm sand was for me what linen for winter would be. So I took a lot of photographs of that, and I brought back a little pot of sand, and I would weave and then touch the fabric and then touch the sand and try and get the right surface going, which worked actually. And also then piece dye the fabrics as well. So there was a lot of experimental work and looking at materials and surfaces. These are some more of the textiles developed through that project, and they're all woven on a hand loom at the RCA. I had the opportunity to travel to Guatemala for a month between the 2 years, and I was working in a mill there, so I was designing interior fabrics for industry, and at the same time I had the opportunity in the afternoons to wander around Antigua and mix with the people there and look at amazing weaving and take a lot of photographs as well. So I was really taken back by all the walls. I mean, they're incredible surfaces, and they seem to love their colors so much, and they just paint their walls all the time. So you have all these layers of paint peeling away, and they create these gorgeous, almost like paintings in a way, time paintings. So I came back with about 30 films of these kinds of, that was still film time. So you couldn't edit, you just had to shoot and hope for the best. So I came back with lots and lots of photographs, and I started trying to develop these photographs into fabric. So on the left is the photograph, on the right is the fabric, and these were woven on a hand loom using, again, 24 shafts, but layers that were now stitched together rather than separated. And then I would use printing techniques to devore or kind of abrasion techniques to get through to the layers underneath. These pieces are in the show, by the way, so a lot of what I'm showing you today you can see if you come on Friday, or the show's on until the 1st of March, so you can see those there as well. As you know, with photographs, with textiles, it's really hard to get the real thing, so it's much better if you come to the show, right? Yeah, so on the left is a photograph, and on the right is the textile piece. And these took about 10 weeks to make. I was really, and that's 8-hour weaving for 10 weeks, and it was quite it was quite an important moment when I did do all the printing, because it felt like I'm incorporating different techniques in the work, and kind of looking at different ways to bring the photography and the fabrics together. At the RCA, I also discovered weaving in a different way, and that's using an industrial jacquard loom. I was able to use my photographs directly in that way. And that loom, I don't know if you've seen an industrial loom, the Oriel Mill in Hendersonville. I've got some incredible looms there, but they're very big machines and they're very noisy. And if you know hand weaving, this is like a completely different beast. So it's not something that you warm up to necessarily. There's lots of bits to it that someone needs to adjust. Usually that's a technician, so you don't normally have the possibility to run those looms yourself or even understand them. You have to design on a computer. So it's generally not something which is very open and inviting. It's a process that you kind of have to pluck up the courage and go for, but you know, you might not in your life, I don't know. And I was quite scared because that machine was in the middle of the floor, the textile floor, and it had its own room that, you know, closed, so you couldn't quite see it unless the door was open. It kind of felt like you're going into a different place. But once I saw the possibilities of working with photography in the way that you can really create a fabric that looks like what you first originally saw, I was really hooked. But at the same time, it was really difficult to find my own way of working with it, because to have a photograph and to apply weave structures on it and to have it woven is something that you can do quite mechanically, but to find a way to make it make sense for you and create something that feels unique using that industrial machine took a little while. So I started looking at the photographs but trying to incorporate a lot of different materials. So the image before was mainly linen, and this is using paper and metallic threads and wool and different kind of materials that would then sometimes be washed, and then you got a completely different feel for them. So I left the RCA, I finished a 2-year degree, and I had a series of wall hangings that were looking at the idea of surface and structure and also applications. I was still interested in interiors or exteriors, but space, but also looking at how a fabric can relate to the space around it and almost form narrative. So this piece, Moss, is one of the first pieces I developed, and that's in the show as well. And talking about narrative, Greece has been a huge influence in my life as a textile designer. It's been, I don't feel that necessarily I had from the beginning a real understanding of textiles, or I didn't grow up thinking that textiles is the world I will embark in. My grandmother was an amazing knitter, so I always grew up with her next to me knitting. She'd make garments for all of us. I still have some actually. For the children I don't have, she made me a set of jumpers because she thought when I have children she might not be able to knit, so that's good to me. Anyway, so I read about Greece when I was in England, so it's interesting because my experience with Greece is almost stronger since I left Greece. So it's not always the case, I'll talk about that later, but I was reading at the time when I was in London, I was reading about the revenge of Arachne and well, the story of Arachne and how weaving began according to the Greek mythology. So the story is that there was Athena, she's the top goddess, and she discovered weaving, or she invented it, I guess, and then she taught all the mortal women. No, she would weave for all the gods and all the heroes of the time, the most incredible fabrics you can imagine, and then she taught weaving to all the mortal women of the time, and one of the women, Arachne, was a super talented weaver herself, and Athena got a little bit stressed out about the super talented weaver and decided to transform her into an Arachne spider and put a curse on her to always weave these beautiful fabrics or webs that would always be destroyed. So I remember reading that and thinking, that's not really fair. You've got this amazing weaver, and what do? You put a curse on her. So I was, at the time, I'd gone to this little island called Zia. It's a tiny little island about it's about an hour from Athens, and they had this enamel factory, completely deserted, and I still love spaces that are a little bit like that. And in Greece you can, well, I don't know, maybe it's here as well, but you have really low fences, so you can kind of go in there and there's no policing going on. In fact, there's loads of chickens and goats and things like that. So I got into that factory, and the space was incredible. So it spurred this idea to make an installation which was about the revenge of Arachne, so a huge web in a space that was slowly being destroyed. So the web would grow in a space that was falling apart. It was a great way of working as well, because it meant that you don't need your ruler and your computer and your calculator, and I'd spent a few months working on those heavily, so it was really nice to just have a cone of yarn and a friend and just throw the thread around in space. So this is actually the second web I made there. The first one was at the back of the factory, but the floor was falling apart. It was quite dangerous for people to come, so we did the web again in another part, and it was lovely because the light would catch it as it went around the building throughout the day. And it was only thin silk thread that we used. It wasn't any, at first I was thinking I have to use rope or something a lot more elaborate, but silk is actually incredible in the way that it reflects light. And I caught objects I found in the factory at the same time. And then at some point, real spiders started making their own webs on the web, so the story was actually growing, and the web was kind of growing as well. And there was a funny story because the children in the village next by are kind of free-range children, so they run around everywhere. And they went into the factory and they saw the first web I ever made. And they went back to the village and they said, "There's a massive spider." So there was this whole mythology about the project in the background, which I found out about later. So, I went there a couple of years ago to see what happened to the web, and the web was all on the floor, and I heard that the same kids had used it as a football pitch. So it kind of goes on, you know, the life of the work goes on, but it was an interesting project. Going back to making though and weaving, I was really keen to kind of pursue these projects I was working on when I was at the RCA. So really work on my own and manage to make fabrics for interior spaces. I had some interest, people were interested in commissioning textiles when I left. But my problem was having access to a machine like this, which is an industrial jacquard loom. So that's incredibly difficult, and I don't think they do prepare you for that kind of problem you might find, because those machines are about, I don't know, £80,000, British pounds, which is probably $120,000. So they're not something you can just buy like that, and they need a lot of space and a lot of maintenance and care and things like that. So I spent about a year trying to find looms I could use and talking to manufacturers, and found it really difficult. And then I came across a residency where it was supported by the British Crafts Council and universities, and the idea was, it was called Next Move, and the idea was that it brought artists or craftspeople, makers, designers back in the university and gave them a studio space, and then they had access to facilities and could also teach and do some lectures and help out with the course. So I relocated from London to Cornwall, which is about 300 miles away, for a loom like this. And that was really amazing, because it meant I could pursue projects in the next few years. So the way, the practice I have is, has changed over the last few years, but I've tried to consistently work in those different areas. So I've worked with design, and I was able to work for commissions and done exhibitions, and I've done quite a lot of teaching in the last few years in research projects that are affiliated with universities, and travel has been a really great way of working as well. So I'm going to go through some of these projects as well. So this was a design project looking at surface, and that was based on the photographs from Guatemala. So on the left are the photographs, and on the right is the fabric. And this fabric was taken on by a company called George Spencer Designs, and they're based in London. The fabric is woven in the UK, and it's sold in their showroom. They called it the Ismini fabric. So and you can go and buy it. And I worked in a way where you license the design, so rather than having a fee, I had to rely on how many meters they sell, which isn't that many actually. But it's been great to feel that there is a kind of commitment there with the company still producing it, and I'm still involved, and it's got the name. It's the only fabric that has the name, my name on it. And this is the fabric. It's woven with cotton and paper, so it has a real papery feel. When you feel it, it almost feels like a wool, and it's in the show, you can see that as well. The first commission I worked on was for a company called the Worshipful Company of Weavers. That's a very big livery company. It's like an ancient English tradition where they would support, they're almost like guilds, they really support craftsmanship. And they, it was the first time they commissioned the fabric to be woven on a computerized industrial loom rather than a hand-woven fabric. And I worked with all the enamel lamps that I took photographs of in the enamel factory in Dieppe, and I worked with all the cracks on the enamel and made a design, computerized design, and the fabric was woven on the loom in Cornwall. It stayed in their offices for 2 years, and now it's part of the Victoria and Albert textile collection. Wow. Yeah, it's good. It's the first commission. And this was a public commission, so this was working in a different way. This was for a law firm, Allen and Overy. It was a Norman Foster building, so very contemporary, glass and kind of concrete everywhere, and everything had to fit. The price was a real issue, the colours was an issue. Everyone had to take off the design before it kind of went into production. So it it was quite a stressful project, and they wanted it yesterday as well. So I remember they would email saying, we want this by tomorrow. And I was traveling, I was helping out the students and taking their work to Milan. So we were driving from London to Milan, which takes about 2 days, and back, and they would email saying, we need this tomorrow, and I'd say, well, I'm in Milan, I'm going back next week, and I send it next week, and they'd say, if you don't send it tomorrow, you lose the commission. So people are like that. It was a lot of kind of stress trying to get this work together. This was the terrace outside the room where the wall hanging or the wall piece was going to be. So I worked with photography again and looked at the outside and the inside space and used a lot of the plants, that feather grass plant, and the photographic technique called photogram, where you place an object rather than a film, and then you get these kind of very ethereal looking images. So I used those to weave with. And these were the 3 panels that were installed. They had to work with the red space around them, and it wasn't as intuitive as I normally work with, because the way I've been fortunate to work with is working on the loom. I worked as a technician when I first went to Cornwall. That meant I learned how to use a loom, and I didn't have to have someone there to change threads, so I could work as a hand weaver works, but on an industrial scale. So this wasn't really like that. This was a lot of pre-planning. But working in a site-specific way became really interesting, and there was various exhibitions in Cornwall that I took part in. This is a Godolphin house, beautiful manor house near Helston in Cornwall, and they held design fairs there. So I was commissioned to work on some pieces for the exhibition, and every time there was a different place within the building that I could exhibit some work. So one of the times I was asked to show some work in the cellar, and this wisteria plant was just outside the space, and it was 300 years old, so it was a pretty incredible plant. It's been there for 10 generations. So these textiles I developed were more a celebration of this plant. So, yeah. So these are the textiles. They're also in the show, and they were hung from a beam, 300-year-old beam in the cellar, and you could walk around them. And that's the beauty with weaving, really, that it's got a front and a back, and it creates an atmosphere when you shine light through it. This was another project that I was able to develop at the same place, and it was looking at the surfaces. So this was a Mortlake tapestry, 18th century tapestry, hiding an 18th century wallpaper. So the story of these 2 surfaces became the inspiration for a new piece of work. So I made a screen that was showing the front of the front of the tapestry and the back of the tapestry, and also the wallpaper panel as well. But it was revealing the wallpaper panel and hiding the tapestry, so it was almost reversing their kind of relationship. And that was shown at CCCD in 2009. That was when I met with them. And the next year, sadly, the people who owned the house had to sell it and sell all of the equipment and well, not the equipment, but all the furniture, and that meant that this wall and the wallpaper was revealed. So I made another piece that was called Wallflower, and it sat next to the original wallpaper in the space. That's in the show here. Travel's been really interesting. I had the opportunity to travel to Japan a few years ago with a fellow weaver who's done a lot of work in Japan, and that idea of displacement, being taken away from your comfort zone and being introduced to a different culture, is really important. And sometimes you don't have a direct way of showing that, but sometimes it just comes through the work in a more, I guess, indirect or in a different way. So going to Japan, it was a 9-day trip, and it was fully packed with visits and excursions, and it was hard to take everything in. But flying back from Japan was amazing, because we flew over Siberia, and I had my camera with me and my phone. So when I realized we're flying over this beautiful landscape, I started taking lots of photographs, and I ran out of battery and I ran out of film, and then 6 hours later we're still flying over Siberia. So it's pretty amazing. We're chasing the sun, we're flying west, So the sun kept coming out and going back down, and so the colours were changing. They were absolutely spectacular. And with the photographs I took, or whichever photographs I took, I tried to weave them and make a fabric. Well, these were 3 pieces of fabric really originally that were, when you went close to them, you almost got a sense of flying over Siberia at 35,000 feet. So experiences, and trying to show these experiences became part of the practice and part of the work. And working on the computer became more and more part of what I was doing as well. So this is a close-up of the fabric, and these are the fabrics. These two of the fabrics are in the show as well, the left one and the right one. And they were, the yarns and the designs are changed intuitively when I'm weaving. So none of this is pre-designed. The original patterns are designed, but once I start weaving it, the fabric kind of takes form on its own. So they're big pieces, they're about 3 meters tall, and the way we've installed them is really clever because you can walk around them and you can really come really close to the fabric. So when you come to the show, don't be scared to walk behind the fabric. In fact, we're going to put some panels that make you go behind the fabric to read something. So yeah, please go and look at the fabric. Working with, again, site-specific work, but also thinking about layering and space and transparency is also part of the practice. So these were pieces developed for a Stroud International Textile Exhibition near London, well, in the West Country, and I worked with water as a theme because that was what ran the textile production over there. So through the water mills they were able to get the electricity they needed to run all of the machines. So I worked a lot with photography and used different manipulations and a lot of drawings that, where you think about ideas. So it's kind of working in different ways on the computer, on the loom, and developing ideas and trying to visualize what the fabrics look like. So we've hung this as you go into the show. These are hanging in the space, so you can look at the show behind them, but you still have a sense of the fragility of and fluidity of water. So working with space and working with computers and digital design was becoming a big part of my practice. I was doing a lot of exhibitions, I was teaching. I was only making money out of the teaching really and the few commissions I was getting. So the way I was pursuing my practice wasn't in a kind of money-making way necessarily, but it meant I had fantastic opportunities and I was building a profile. So there is a big competition in England called the Jerwood Award, and every few years it runs for a different discipline. So in 2009 they decided to bring all the disciplines together, the craft disciplines, and they run it as a competition that was themed. So I was invited to apply, and the theme for the exhibition was impact. And I'd just been to the Oriole Mill, I've just been to North Carolina by then for the CCCD Inspired Design Conference, and I remember seeing the mill. I was gobsmacked. I couldn't believe there's a place like the place you have. And I remember seeing that big 3-meter loom they have at the mill and thinking, in terms of impact, what can you really suggest that you can make? And I was thinking, well, if I used a loom like that, it was 3 meters wide, which is how many inches? I don't know. 117 inches, that's it. So 117 inches wide, and you turn it round on its side, and you could actually create a wall in a space. So the idea was to create a fabric that became a space, or became a room. And I didn't really think I was going to get the commission, to be honest. So I thought, that's my dream. This is what I'd like to do if I was able to do this. And to my horror, they said, okay, you can do that. And I remember emailing you guys and saying, would you be interested? Do you remember that? And you were amazing because you said yes, and you could have so easily said, are you crazy? No, but it was an amazing project. So this is the loom at the Oriole Mill. This is loom number, I can't remember, 1. There you go, 1. It's a reason it's the first loom. It's amazing. It's huge. You can see that. So I was able to travel to North Carolina twice that year and to be supported by the Oriole Mill to develop this fabric. And the fabric was designed to tell the story of the space where it was that it was occupying, and it was exhibited. So I'm sorry there's a bit of text here, but I'll just move on to the next slide because I'm aware of the time. So this is the fabric in the show in the Dovecot Studios in Edinburgh. That's the second place it travelled after the Jerwood space. And it created a loop, so it worked a lot with the architecture of the space, and it meant that you were invited to go inside and really experience the textile space from the inside. And the design, it started on the top left corner, finished on the bottom right, and it was a story of London being slowly built, and then the architecture and the maps from London became the crazes in the ceramic tiles, and then the ceramic tiles became populated with writing from all the teachers who used to teach at where the Jerwood space used to be, which is a school, and then all the writing became a list of all the children that were evacuated in the war. So it was narrative being brought together in the form of the textile and occupying the space in an architectural way. So this is the fabric, different views of the fabric as you go in. It took a lot of people to install this. So I think it was about 8 of us, actually, and there was a custom-made frame. So getting the fabric woven was one part of the story, which was really challenging, right? It was really challenging to get it done. And then getting it up in the space was another thing. So it was a pretty amazing project to be involved in. And this is with people going in. A lot of people really enjoyed being inside the fabric. They'd say that it reminds them hiding underneath their mother's tablecloth or something, and when they were growing up. And it's interesting, that sensation of being enveloped by fabric. And these are some of the close-ups of the surfaces. We didn't have a chance to bring this fabric here, but the show is traveling to Utah. So if you have a chance to go to Utah, you don't pronounce Utah like this, do you? Yeah. You do? Mm-hmm. Utah. Okay, so if you have a chance to go to Utah in March, you can see the fabric there. So we're going to send it there. The space is bigger, and this fabric needs space to be shown to its best capacity. Okay. Moving on, there's been some of the collaborative projects are also in the exhibition. I really love working with other people. It's great to be able to bring two different minds together and talk about ideas and get enthusiasm going, and you learn so much from other people's love and passion about materials and crafts. So I've been fortunate to work in different projects like that, and that's mainly through universities. So those are places where they bring different people together, and you're allowed to play in a way, and there's also opportunities to exhibit the work as well. So this was a project called Pairings, and I was paired up with a ceramicist called Sharon Blakey. She's based at Manchester Metropolitan University, and we instantly fell in love because we both love surfaces and stories, and we both get super excited about archives and things that we find and colours. And so we started working together and looking at how we can combine ceramics and textiles. And there were some ways that were really obvious. So Sharon would look at some of the fabrics and then make some ceramic pieces that responded to the fabrics, looking at all the surfaces and the textures and the colours, and using thread as well, incorporated in the ceramic pieces. And she lived in Manchester, I lived in Cornwall, which is a huge distance, so we only had a few precious days together to develop the work. And we worked a lot with a collection of spoons that she was focusing on from the Manchester City Gallery. It was a collection of spoons that was hidden and forgotten about for years, and then discovered. So we were amazed at those spoons themselves. So she started making spoons out of ceramic, and I would weave spoons, and there were happy coincidences where her spoon would fit in the fabric without me realizing. We were both working on the same scale. But this was pretty amazing, with the edge of the fabric and the spoon working together. So it was almost like we were in tune. And these pieces are in the show, you can see them. I'm working with Gary as well. He's a maker who works with wood, and he works a lot with digital technologies as well. So we tried to pair up the loom I was working on and the pacer, which is a big milling machine. So we did that through the digital platform and using three-dimensional software to create new surfaces. So we were looking at all the three-dimensional weave structures that you can see in the software I use, and we were exporting them and using them to mill wood with. So you end up having a series of wooden pieces that look like magnified weave structures, and they are amazing to look at and touch. So, and they're in the show, so you can really see them. This is some of them there. And some of them are shown with their respective weave structures, so you can see the fabric and then you can see the wood. There's been interest in this, but it's a very time-consuming process and it's really expensive because those digital machines take so much time to set up. So something like that, a small milled piece, might take, I don't know, 6 hours to develop. So to be able to market and sell that is another story. But we had interest by Jaguar Land Rover, and they bought a piece for to use for one of their future cars. So that was interesting. So there's things like that that have come out of it, and it was really interesting working in another material. Anyway, these are some of the close-ups, and this one as well. This is honeycomb. So you can really see the three-dimensional fabric and how that translates into a timber surface. Going back to travel, I had the opportunity back in 2010 to travel to Bangladesh, and that was through the British Council. So they organized a cultural exchange program where they brought makers and designers from London to Pakistan and Bangladesh, and the idea was that we would spend some time teaching there, and at the same time we would be traveling around to see all the textile facilities there as well. It's not really relevant to the show, but I thought it was such an amazing trip, and I thought I've got this opportunity. I might as well travel to Bangladesh for 10 minutes today. So I'll be quite quick about this. But Bangladesh is squished in between India and well, in fact it is inside India, and it's a very particular country. It's quite new. It's overpopulated. It's very poor. It's got a lot of challenges with landslides and flooding, and it's populated by the most amazing, kind of proud people I've ever met. So I went out there. I'd never traveled to India or Pakistan, so I didn't really have an experience of that part of the world. But I traveled out there and I stayed out there for 9 weeks. So in that time I really had a chance to see a lot of things. I was positioned at the College for Textiles, Engineering and Technology, and that's one of the top colleges in Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is very well known for its textile production. So it's one of the biggest, I guess, industries they have. So being able to secure a place in a state university means that you then get a position in industry. So it's very important for people to be able to get there. So, and it's very difficult to get a place. So these guys, suddenly I was teaching guys instead of girls. You know, in textiles that's not the case normally. So I had something like 95 students, out of which 92 were men, and I had 3 girls or something like that. And they were the sweetest guys I've ever met. And also, they've never really designed anything. So their experience with textiles is purely through technology, physics, chemistry, looking at looms. It's a mechanical approach, really. It's not a creative approach. And even though their sense of color is amazing, they don't really understand how a fabric is developed and designed. So this is their college environment. I was told we could use the jacquard there, we could design and then get things woven and have an exhibition. The loom hadn't worked for 10 years, so we were, you know, you can see about 3 inches of dust in it. And it's a really sad story because they haven't got the money to fix these machines, and also there's no almost appreciation of the experience of making. So making a fabric doesn't seem to be an objective. It's just knowing how to make a fabric when you get to the industrial level that counts. So they kind of didn't have the enthusiasm I have when I see a fabric being woven, and I think this is you know, it's such an incredible thing. They didn't have a clue how that would work. So we got to do lots of designing and drawing and working on color palettes, and they developed designs for repeats, and this is the best we could do really in the time I was there. But there were some really keen students, and Nakisur, he was great. He stayed in touch, and a lot of them are still friends on Facebook, and they email once in a while asking what's going on and when I'll go back and things like that. So it was a really interesting experience, and I think they value design now more as well, because I brought a whole load of books with me when I went out there, and so they were able to look at design from a different perspective. But at the same time, I was able to travel around and look at different production units for textiles. So textiles is everywhere you go. You see carts full of textile rolls. You see yarns everywhere. Everything that's invisible in England becomes visible in Bangladesh. So, and everything is handmade as well. You see craft in the mass production scale. So this is one of the initiatives where they were hand printing using block prints. And doing lots of tie-dyeing, and sewing buttons, and hemming and ironing. I mean, everything is done by hand, and that's something that you're not used to seeing. I remember going to a very big shop. I mean, it was huge, in fact, and they said everything in here is hand woven. I thought they must have got it wrong, you know, but no, they haven't. Everything's handmade, and their skill is absolutely amazing. And they work with a lot of fair trade organizations as well. So this is People Tree. Is People Tree in the US as well? I know it's a British-based company. But I saw this fabric being printed, and then I saw it on their website. So it was nice to see the continuity. And the textiles were amazing. This was a Jamdani weaving technique where they have motifs woven on the saris, and that's done by hand using little shuttles on pit looms. So I was able to go out and visit the weavers. So it's mainly two weavers, an apprentice and a master weaver, and they work with those tiny little cow horn tools, and they embroider almost a design into the fabric. So it's a very specialized technique, and all the designs come from generation to generation, so it's a very special skill. And some of them are pursuing natural dyes, so this is Jamdani using natural dyes. And jute, I mean, jute was absolutely incredible. I was able to go to the packing area for jute. It's like a jute mountain. And what I can't communicate through the photographs is the smell and the dust as well. So the smell was really strong, and the dust was amazing. The light was falling into the building, and you had all the dust kind of flying around, and then you had all the colourful men and women there. I mean, I thought I was on a film set. It was beautiful. And all this jute is being packed up, and it's being shipped to America actually for the building industry. So this is where it comes from. Nice to see that. And I was able to travel to Tangail as well, one of the textile villages in Bangladesh, and look at traditional sari weaving. But what was amazing was catching those glimpses of warps being stretched out in the streets. So this was just walking down the village and taking a right, and suddenly you fall across almost like a textile road. And so these are thousands of threads that are just being stretched out to wind on a warp beam to put on one of the looms. Yeah, it was amazing. And you can see the people at the end. I mean, this is meters and meters of it. And this is what they're like on the loom. So they do a lot of tie-dye and dip-dyed warps, and they are jacquard looms, but of course no computers. Everything's done by hand. Yeah, this is another image of the threads being stretched out. They were amazing. It was so beautiful. Kind of made me think it would be amazing to do a project like that here, where you got people who have these skills to just stretch warps out. It would just be it would just be an incredible thing to do. And everything's again done by hand, so cards cut by hand. When the fan speaks next time, you'll know everything about card cutting for jacquard and how time consuming it is. This little boy was just looking at me, staring at me while he was cutting the cards. It was quite amazing. These are some of the pit looms for weaving. Then I came across a family that makes reeds. So the reed is what you have at the front of the fabric when you're weaving to almost comb the fabric. And it's a very specialized making method. You don't see anyone making reeds anymore. So I don't know anyone who makes reeds in Europe, for example. And when I came across Ruma making those reeds, I was amazed at how quick she could do it and how perfect it looked. And I was really hoping I'd be able to get making something when I was there. So I asked whether I could spend some time with them in their village, and I did. I stayed in a guest house nearby, and I was able to learn how to make reeds. And also, I had some ideas for other types of reeds I wanted to make, so we did some reeds together. I made some reeds and then they made some reeds as well. At first they didn't want to make any reeds. They said, if we teach you our skill, you go back to England, you teach everyone else, we're not going to have a job. You're thinking, wow, you can't even imagine. I mean, they pick out the bamboo and they cut it, and the knowledge, the know-how is quite spectacular. And they're at the bottom, because reed makers aren't even appreciated as much as weavers are. So, but if they make a mistake on the reed, then the whole fabric is done for. So their skill is really to be manifested, not, you know, not discarded. So we did some fan reeds together. Well, they mostly did the fan reeds, and then I did some really dodgy looking ones, which I still use, and they're in the show actually. They're very beautiful objects, and we're going to hang them up so you can come and see them. And I was able to bring them back to England and use them on my loom. So coming back to the UK, I just wanted to weave with my hands now. It kind of felt like going to Bangladesh and seeing all the craftsmanship. It meant that I wanted to do more things using my hands. But working in collaboration with Gary and having opportunities to exhibit work as well, we also worked digitally. So I did a series of weavings, and then we scanned them in and drew them, but using a big pacer machine. So that big machine that we used to mill the wood with, we substituted all the tools with pens and brushes, and it meant that the machine was doing the drawings itself. So they're quite interesting drawings, because say when we used a brush and ink, the machine would run out, the brush would run out of ink slowly. So it was up to you to decide when to stop the machine and refill. And it was an interesting way of creating a one-off kind of artifact using a digital process. Sometimes it was really accurate, and sometimes less so. It was a lot more expressive. So these are on show as well. I left Cornwall about 2 years ago and decided I wanted to go. I wasn't actually sure. I didn't decide what I wanted to do. I just knew I had to move on from where I was. So I went back to Greece for a little while, and that was an opportunity to look at Greek tradition as well. And I think that trip to Bangladesh did that. It made me feel I need to learn a lot more about my culture in my country. So I went back for about 4 months, and I had the chance to borrow my father's car and do this massive road trip and try and find weavers out there, which isn't that easy, unfortunately, because I think we don't have guilds or groups like you who really love textiles, and we don't have schools that support craft, so somehow craft and making is not seen as part of contemporary culture, and it's not really supported, and there's no real crafts council, and there's no industry, so it was a really sad story. So I started off thinking this is going to be great, and it ended up being, you know, going to loads and loads of museums rather than actually seeing making. But I did see one incredible festival. This is on the island of Karpathos. It's near Crete, and they have a festival in the end of January every year. Not January, August, where all the women wear traditional clothes that aren't quite traditional because they're mainly made with Bangladeshi fabric. So I never thought I'd see anything as colourful outside Bangladesh. But here you go, on the island of Karpathos. These are the women. Wearing the dresses, and they dance for 3 days and 3 nights. So that was a pretty spectacular thing. And their homes are extravagant, full of embroideries and colour, and it's a very particular thing. I mean, aesthetics is another matter, but being able to carry this off and live by it is pretty amazing. So I met some interesting people, and I was trying to hunt down the weavers. So these are the 2 last weavers on the island. They're retired. They're in their 80s, and you can see they're not wearing Bangladeshi fabrics, they're wearing their own woven creations, and they speak a dialect. So when I went to meet them, I had a guy with me who was able to translate, and I told them I'm a weaver. They didn't quite understand, and then I said I want to see their loom, so they took me in and showed me their loom. That's at the top, and Sophia, the lady who sat at the loom, started explaining how the weaving happens, and then she got really tearful and started saying, I've left my loom on its own, there's no work on my loom, there's no work on... So she started crying. It was really moving. So I saw her, you know, you see an old lady cry, you cry, right? I cried anyway. So then when she saw me be moved by this, she got really excited and said, oh, I will bring my fabrics, I'll show them to you, I'll dress you up. So here's me dressed up, wearing all their dresses. Anyway, it's a pretty amazing thing. But she can't weave anymore, her feet hurt, and no one's going to buy their fabric. So, but it's a shame, because these people, you almost think they're national treasures, right? In Japan, these people become national treasures, and in Greece, they have to travel, you know, for hours, walk for hours to collect onions and olives and things like that. So it's a shame, really. It was really depressing, actually. And the same happened with industry. So there isn't very much industry in Greece. There was an initiative when I was there. There was an exhibition where you could look at tradition and try and make something new from it. So I decided to take part, mainly because I was away for 15 years and I didn't have any contacts there, and I wanted to learn a bit about what's going on in Greece. So I worked with my family's own collection of lace pieces that my great-grandfather designed. So lace is something I looked at first when I came back from Japan in 2006, and I joined a lace group in Cornwall, and I was making bobbin lace with all the ladies there, and it was a really interesting thing to do. And then I left it for ages. And going back and revisiting it from a design perspective was really interesting. So this guy is my great-grandfather, and he was a real entrepreneur. He set up this lace business where he would design. He had a group of lace ladies making lace on one of the islands and supplying them to lots of different people. But he wasn't very good with business, so it didn't go very far. And then he started importing American speedboat engines, and so he was kind of crazy guy. I've heard about him all my life. My mother absolutely adored him. So it was interesting working with these pieces. It means that we have a very big collection of these. So these were some of the textile pieces I used for designing with, and it meant I was able to meet a loom manufacturer in Greece, which he was 20 minutes away from my parents' house in Athens. It's a company run by two brothers, and they're really painstakingly trying to hold it together because it's a very difficult time now, as you know, and industry isn't really thriving. It's very difficult to get any orders and survive in that climate. But they were so generous, and they said, our looms are your looms, anything you want to do, just come and try things out. So I was able to weave a long lace piece there, and it was for the competition, the Textile Mediterranean competition. So that's going to be in the show. We're going to hang it tomorrow. All right, so I'm really quickly I've gone over. I'm really sorry. Okay, so I get to the point of the show. So clouds are, I guess, what is the theme for the show. I'm showing a lot of work which is from the projects I've talked about, but there's a new body of work based on clouds, and it was almost an antidote to the site-specific works that I was working on before. So I really struggled, after I went back to Greece for 3 or 4 months, I really struggled about where I would go. And location and place became such a difficult problem in my head, and I couldn't figure out whether I should be in Greece with my family. My grandmother was quite ill. I felt my parents needed me. My friends I hadn't seen for years all had children. You know, it felt like maybe I should do that, or then there's England that supported me all these years. So I really struggled with it, and I knew I had this exhibition that was going to come here, and it was in England as well. So I decided to work with clouds, because it felt like no matter where you are, the sky is almost the same. Okay, in England maybe there's more clouds, not as many as here though. It's not raining. But also it's something that changes, so it forces you to almost look at the sky and look at something that changes constantly and focus your attention. I don't know, it felt like looking at clouds was a way of working out what I was doing, and also thinking about, actually it doesn't matter where you are, because who you are is what you bring with you, and that might be anywhere in the world. So it really helped me. It was a very personal project, and it really helped me kind of focus. So these are some of the spectacular clouds. It's like a little lace cloud. And this is another cloud picture. And I've taken thousands of cloud pictures over the last few years, and I've been kind of printing them out and drawing them and using watercolors. So doing a really slow process of designing rather than a really fast process. So I'm showing that process in the show. These are some of the watercolors and kind of color studies and windings. I've done hundreds of windings of colors and clouds and kind of threads. These are mostly linens. And also all of these tiny little, how do you call them? They're almost, do you know, how do you call them? Sorry? Yeah, like swatches, but they're little plastic ones where you thread, like you put thread around them.
It's embroidery.
Yeah, flat bobbin. So I've got about 300 of those. They're not in the show. They're in the studio in London. But I just kept doing this. And then working with mood boards. So I really took it back to what the foundation of designing is and tried to really explore all the different possibilities. And it was great. And this was partly how it was shown in the UK, and it's very similar to what it looks like here, where you can see the fabrics hanging. They're both hand-woven fabrics and woven on the jacquard, and they're placed on the wall, they're pinned on the wall, but they're away from the wall so you can see their shadows. And then there's the design boards next to it. And the new addition for this show is a film of shadows, textile shadows. So a textile shadow depends on its weave, right? So I filmed with Simon Barker, we filmed another collaborative project. We filmed textile shadows and we've made them into a film that looks like clouds. So the idea was that all these textile shadows look like different formations in the sky, and the sound in the film is the electronic hum of the loom. So it's the first time I'm showing it, so it'll be interesting to see what you think. Nothing really happens, so it's quite boring. But yeah, you can take your time. We'll be in the show, so you can take your time and look at it. And this is part of the images on the film, and they slowly move and overlap. So it's the same shadow, but it's overlaid 3 times, and there's different colors in it. So so it's quite. You'll see what you think. But I'm quite excited by it. I feel I want to work in this way more. Yeah. So thank you very much. Yeah, please, if you. Yeah.
Does anybody have a question?
Hi.
I was privileged to be in Edinburgh when you opened the German.
I remember. Yeah, I remember you.
And I got to go in.
You got to go in.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Belinda Rose said hello.
Oh, hi.
Okay.
Thanks
This
for
was
coming.
amazing.
Yeah.
This really special.
Oh, great. Thank you. Wow, the world is much smaller than you think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any questions? Will you all come to the show? Yeah. You don't have to go. If you come on Friday, we're going to have drink and food, and you know, it will be great. But if you can't come on Friday, I completely understand. It's quite far. But do go until the 1st of March. It's on, right? We've got some flyers. What's that?
Cards in the back you can
Yeah.
take and ask your friends, and hope to see a lot of you here.
Great. Thank you very much for your
If anybody has
patience.
gotten on our mailing list and would like to get notifications in the future, we would do the text